viewing audience in the community of Hingham, and hopefully the live signal will be up soon, and people, of course, can watch these proceedings by going to HCAM. We thank HCAM for being here. We thank all the members of the committee, Town Engineer Roger Fernandez, our extraordinarily capable Administrative Assistant Carol Costello, and the members of advisory who are constantly helping and monitoring us. And Mark, if you could give a very brief executive summary for those at home about the barn Phase 4 project, and then bring us up to date on where it is, I think that would be the way to proceed.
Sure. So, good evening. The Rec Commission's request is for $375,000 to finish off Phase 4 of the Hingham Rec Barn, which will create a very large multi-purpose room. And the Rec Barn is located right behind Town Hall. So jumping into our new document here, which Roger Fernandez created, is a very detailed budget which lists every line item with the entire construction for not only the $250,000 that the town approved last year, but for the additional request of $375,000. So you can see in the budget summary, the total building cost is $570,000. That also includes the architectural fee, site work for $110,000, and then you can see the $250,000, which was approved at last year's town meeting, and the $375,000 request that we have for this year's round of CPC. As I'm certainly not going to go through every line item of this budget, but if I scroll all the way down to the end of the budget, line 107, you can see that the entire construction cost is $473,000, which comes to $236 a square foot. There's a 10% contingency built into this. The designer fees, right now we have plugged in at $50,000 for the total building cost of $570,000. Then when you work in all the site work, that's another $110,000. So being a construction project of this magnitude, it's never a concrete number, but we're confident with our $375,000 request with CPC that we will get this project done. And even though that, as you can see from Roger's budget summary, it shows a balance of a negative $55,000, at the last Rec Commission meeting, we were well aware that of a project this size and with contingencies in construction projects, the Rec Commission took a vote to provide up to 10% of the construction cost of the barn to put towards the balance. So we're fully invested in this project. We certainly couldn't do it without the CPC or the town, and we're willing to do anything within reason with our financial means to put this project over the hump and to provide the flexibility with the contingency so the project can move forward. The second document that I have was similar to the one that I presented at the first presentation, but is a picture up on from Dorian Witter Architects, which is the final design of the layout of the first floor, which would be one very large multi-purpose room that can be divided into two separate rooms. There's a small waiting area, a male and female toilets. and stairwell for access to the basement and attic. Excuse my voice.
Should we ask for comments from the project manager?
Yes, I think one of the things that I was very impressed with in Mark's preparation for this evening is that working with Roger, we have a very detailed line item budget which lays out all of the scope items within the project, and I think it's very well defined. And then we have a peer review estimate attached on the last page. And what's nice about it's always nice when the peer review estimate corroborates or validates the initial estimate's line items. So I think it gives a very good representation, realistic representation of where the project is in terms of scope and cost. So that was an important parameter for, I think, this evening's meeting too, so.
And the peer review is from MCI Contracting?
Yes, that's the page.
Is that somebody who's expected to bid on the project?
Well, that's the current contractor under contract that's done the work to this point. So what we asked them for was, like as Gary said, an estimate for what he thinks the next phase would look like. So it's an actual contractor's estimate. If you look at my estimate and his estimate, there's a little give and take, and maybe not a lot, but a little give and take in certain items. But we tried to sort of just have a standalone estimate from the contractor and look at ours sort of objectively, and so they did come pretty close, given the next scope of work we're looking at.
And so you're confident that we can get this delivered as a finished project with this amount of money?
Well, the only outlier in this thing, and Mark and I spoke with Vicky briefly about this. Up to this point, we developed the plan as you see there now, with the initial funding in terms of the architectural service, the professional services. Prior to that, and up to last week, we were told that there was no need based on the square footage and the use for a fire suppression system. And as of this morning, meeting with them again, now we're being told that there's a potential that there might be a need for a fire suppression system in the building. If that's the case, then the cost will go up.
That would be sprinklers.
Sprinklers, yeah, sprinklers.
They come in at a fairly reasonable cost, though, don't they?
With all of this, the biggest issue is always the fact that we're paying, prevailing wage working in the public sector. So it could, perceivably be, I hesitate to throw a dollar amount at it, but it'd be over $25,000, I would surmise, and hopefully under 50. It really depends on what they're going to ask us to sprinkler. So I was hoping to talk with the building commissioner based on use to see if it's still even necessary, and sort of go from there. But just by way of full disclosure, that is something that we've got to, the last sort of aspect we've got to entertain.
Would that be on, I'm sorry, would that be on all floors or just on the?
And that happens to be one of the questions, and Vicki and I were actually talking about that maybe a half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago. Are they looking for all 3 floors? And by 3 floors, we mean basement, first floor, and the attic space. So to be candid, I'm not really sure. I don't know. I have to look to someone else to help us with that.
I understand there's another issue with doors that has to go before the Historic District Commission.
Yeah, I don't think it's a big issue, but certainly because your exterior doors, we want to do our due diligence and get it approved by the Historical Commission, which will be, we want to be on their agenda for next week's meeting.
And the doors that you're proposing, the cost for those are already in this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and just to be clear, we already have gone before the Historic District, the Commission, for this project. This would be a second visit to that commission because of that one change in the outside feature, just that access, door into the main entrance. And I spoke to Andrea, might have been yesterday, or Friday, no, yesterday I believe I spoke with her, and she confirmed that it'd be a good idea for us to come back.
Other questions or comments from members of the
The only
committee?
comment that I want to make on behalf of the Recreation Commission is because Mark went over that slide so fast, is the fact that we already can look forward to program revenue of $350,000 coming out of this building. So I think it's
Wow.
important for the committee as well as
year?
the viewing public at home.
A year?
Each year, yes.
How did
you get that number? Well, that's just the,
That's a real number.
that's a real number.
So our
The
current,
programs that we're doing.
just our dance and our yoga classes bring in $350,000 for this current year, real number. So we would take those programs and put them over at the barn. So when you see that little finance equation up there, those are real numbers, not projections of any sort. So
Alleviating, and just to add to that, alleviating the parking that is so needed here at Town Hall. So to me, it's very important that people realize we're not funding a building and then guessing what we might do with it. There are programs that will be there day one when it's opened. And if you look at this slide, you will see that those programs, the payroll and expenses are paid, and then we have money left over that will be put in reserve for the maintenance of the building and reserves for maintenance going forward. So I think that's important for people to know. They're funding something, taxpayer money, that will be taken care of over the
And-
years by rec.
And Vicki, as you know and Mark knows, we're very anxious to get the building done so we can put some SNAP programs in
Right.
there. It's
Absolutely.
perfect
Right.
yeah,
for the
whether
SNAP programs.
SNAP programs,
Yep.
many nonprofits use the rec facility, John Barker Basketball. So we have great partnerships with many nonprofits. Certainly open up our doors to them all.
So does that mean if there is overage, and there is, like to 56, potentially 56,000, and then the fire suppression, can the rec take care of all of that? So
I'm
would it
careful
be-
not to speak for the rec commission without them voting on it, but we've really been planning for this year, 3 years in advance, by watching what we spend from the money that our biggest fundraiser of the year is our road race, and we've purposely been putting money aside, knowing that we might have to step in on this last phase to put it over the hump. So I'm careful not to say yes or no answer, but I think that there would be willing to vote to get that done.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? I'll just say then, well, are there any questions or comments from advisory or from the public? I think this remains a great project for a very historic building, and it's got a great multi-purpose layout plan that the town should be able to use for decades to come. So, just my personal view. And at the risk of wearing out your voice, Mark, I guess you're on to the next item, the Crestfield Playground.
And you brought your cheering gallery.
And Mark's voice is challenged tonight, so if at any time somebody wants to pitch in and help him out.
Thank you. All right, so Crestfield Playground, jumping right into it. Project is really twofold, is that you can see from the current condition that the current playground area is literally used as a place to discard toys. The field and the basketball courts are in decent shape, but really, as stated in the Town of Hingham Open Space and Recreation Master Plan, Crestfield is significant because it's the only substantial public recreation facility in the southwest section of Hingham. That being said, this is the only place in the south area of Hingham that we really need to provide a commercial playground for it. And secondly, but perhaps most important, an underserved population in Hingham and in surrounding communities, without a doubt, is the special needs population. So we can accomplish two things by providing a playground at Crest Field. We can provide a playground to an area of Hingham that absolutely needs it, and we can serve an underserved population, the special needs population. And what I mean by that is, if I can approach the pictures here. The playground would be built in an all-inclusive manner, and what I mean by that is, so the dark green area is poured-in-place rubber. So the wood chips, even though that they're considered handicap accessible, over time they decompose, where the poured-in-place rubber has a life expectancy of 15 to 20 years. There's wide ramps, so children, whether they are in wheelchairs or if they have lower mobility issues, can navigate the playground structure. There's a wheelchair accessible swing. There's a seesaw contraption with backs to the seats, so children with mobility issues, whether it be their arms or their legs, have a seat to sit in rather than just a simple platform. Sensory boards here. So really the entire playground is built for, geared towards the special needs population. And the general population would also have a blast at this playground too. So it really accomplishes two very important things.
Has there been any change in the cost proposal?
No, the cost proposal is still the same. So the playground layout that you have before you, with a community build, is approximately $110,000. So we're asking the CPC for $100,000, and the Farm Hills Association is fully committed to raising the additional funds. They're actually hoping to raise more than the $10,000 to include some park benches and some additional shade structures. But they're definitely invested for the $10,000 and hoping to do even more than that.
Is that fundraising underway?
We've been making calls, people don't wanna commit until the project is ready.
Could you use the microphone if you, and perhaps identify yourself for the viewing public?
I'm Karen Daly, I live in the Farm Hills neighborhood. We have been making calls to local businesses and individuals about donating money to the project. A lot of people don't wanna do it until the project has been approved. They don't wanna donate to a non-existent project. We have definite donations from the old Montessori preschool as well as preschool playmates. And we're talking to a lot of banks and Whole Foods, and we're looking into grants on a national or local level who will also assist us.
And is the neighborhood association also going to participate in the construction?
We're going to participate in the construction. We're also going to do a neighborhood collection for donations just among our civic society.
And the community build saves $18,000 off of the installation price. So it's a substantial commitment that Farm Hills is willing to undertake. And that format of fundraising is just in line with what Bradley Woods did as well, is that once they are awarded the money from CPC, they were able to fundraise additional funds. And being a public playground, I think that the community feels better about that way rather than the upfront, because people aren't sure whether or not the project is going to be funded.
You've got a perfect opportunity here for some Eagle Scout projects also, for the benches and the little, I assume you want something like a little pagoda, or that's the wrong word, whatever the thingy is. Gazebo, thank you. Not to be confused, not to be confused with the other gazebo, but that would be perfect. And that would, and they bring their own money and stuff, so that would be
Yeah,
great.
that's a great idea, yeah.
Jim Watson, did you have anything you wanted to add as the project manager?
Well, I just think it's great, it's the multi-purpose aspect. One thing we mentioned before was not just benches, but tables, so people could sit and read or play chess or have a meal or whatever. And also maybe in the long run, a fairly basic adult exercise circuit. So as some of us get plump from sitting and eating, the other people can be getting thin. I mean, seriously, it could complement the other activities.
Yeah, no, they do make fitness components now around playgrounds, so that is a good idea, yeah. Sure.
Do you worry about any territorial issues? Are the neighbors going to think that the kids brought in from elsewhere, but they're kids that need such a facility?
No, not at all, because believe it or not, even in the condition that the current playground is at, people do come from all over to ride those broken down toys on the pavement.
Sure, they do though. It draws them.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, Farm Hills Association is here tonight, and they'll tell you that they welcome anyone over there from Hingham or from surrounding communities.
Mark, I've been voted to ask this, where are the toys gonna go?
I think if you want me to.
Yeah, please.
And could you state your name, so people at home will know who you are?
So Ted Healy, the Farm Hills president. I spoke the last time, but we've certainly talked about that, and it'll probably go out in our distribution for the Farm Hills members to go down. Maybe, like Sandra said, we could even have a little yard sale for the misfit toys. We could see which ones of value can go to another home, or the rest we can take to the town dump.
Swap
The
shop.
swap area, and see whichever ones get picked up there, and the last of the pieces will get discarded, and then Crestfield will be a nice, clean location and destination for many kids to come and play. So that's the plan.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from members of the committee?
I just have a comment. It was good to hear about the specific dollar value of what the build assistance from the Farm Hills. I don't think we knew that with the one in Bradley Woods, and I didn't realize what a substantial amount of savings that was as an in-kind contribution. So that's very helpful to make that point.
Questions or comments from members of the public? Well, it's a tremendous project for an underserved population, and I thank the Recreation Commission and the Farm Hills Neighborhood Association for all the great work you've done on this.
And we'll be there when it opens up. I think it's gonna be great.
Yeah, it's nice on a beautiful sunny day like that.
All right, so unless there's anything further on the Crest Playground, our next order of business is the Bear Cove Fire Museum. Thanks, Mark.
Thank
Hope you're
you.
feeling better.
Yeah, you can go home now.
Gary or Dick or Jerry gonna be here?
Actually, the flu is intervened.
Oh, my God.
On my colleagues at the Fire Museum, so I've been elected, because I wasn't able to be here for 2 meetings, I've been elected to bring everybody up to date. And in going into this meeting, the members of we met with the membership of the Fire Museum and addressed the concerns that were raised at the last 2 CPC meetings. The first concern was the historical relevance of this portion of this building, which is Building 52, and the historical relevance of this relative to the shipyard, the ammunition depot, relative to potentially listing this on the local inventory of historic places. And so I went into the Naval Archives, the National Archives in Waltham, and was able to find some significant information. We had originally thought that this series of buildings, which is in the original the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot, was actually 1939, when in fact this portion was 1903. This portion of the ammunition depot was established by the Navy to compensate for the deficiencies in space and other facilities in Charlestown. So this was really a support function on the south shore, the south side of Boston, that would augment Charlestown Navy Yard. So that was its basis. It was, the land was taken in 1903. It was originally an agrarian series of farms, a couple of horse farms, and it was then developed. Now, what's significant is there were 904 acres that were taken at the time. It was located, it was chosen because of its location at southern end of the harbor, entrance to the harbor, and also the Ford River area in the Weymouth Back River, so it had excellent naval access. The function of it was essentially to provide space for storage and calibration and assembly of small and medium caliber ammunition that would support the naval fleet, the Atlantic Fleet, which was in World War I supporting the European effort. And so there was also a training camp that was part of this that was called Camp Hingham. And part of that mission of that camp was to basically not only train the naval personnel, but also to, as they were going to be supporting the convoys going to Europe, but also to maintain the morale of the Navy in World War I. So in looking at the buildings, and I have a very, I'm going to give you the copy of this, I have a history that was done on this, and in it lists all the buildings in the ammunition depot, of which there are over 100 in the original World War I, which is 1903 to 1939, which was the first phase of this. Over 100 buildings, and what's interesting is in this survey of the buildings, it lists every single building that was done, its year, its condition, and its status, and its significance in terms of its use. Now, Building 52, which is on the southeastern portion of this site, and there was a nice aerial photograph that I believe the Historic Commission found, a very nice historical photograph, and this photograph shows, although it's very hard to see, it shows the ammunition depot, and in this portion of the depot on this side are the earlier magazine buildings. Building 52 was a magazine storage building. The idea was it was a reinforced concrete box with walls on 4 sides, a concrete floor, but the roof was frangible, meaning that if there was ever an explosion, it went up. It didn't go sideways to harm people. Now, I also found a number of maps, which this was kind of an interesting site visit to the Naval Archives, because this is the original map that was done on the existing condition survey, which was done in 1961. In 1961, the federal government and the Navy decommissioned this shipyard and this ammunition depot, and they were planning to dispose of it. It wasn't until 1971 that it was given to the town. And so this is the early map. The shaded portion is how the town intended to parcelize it. But what's interesting is it shows all of the significant buildings, and over here is Building 52. Of the over probably 40 magazine-type large barn buildings, the 54 by 205 feet long, of the large quantity of buildings that originally existed, there's only 5 left. And Building 53 is one of the 5. The double building that the school department is using by the DPW facility is one of the unique buildings, all going back to World War I. What was interesting to me is that in looking at the history and the development of the import relative to the Building 112, which is the Bearco Fire Museum exhibition building where we show the fire trucks. Building 112 was built in World War I, but it was rebuilt and redesigned in 1939. It was basically an emergency situation in 39 because they had to gear up for what was going on in Europe. Essentially, that building was completely refitted and redesigned to be an ordnance commissioning building. So what you see is World War II revisions to a World War I building. What's interesting about these buildings is that they're all original from World War I. And so that was I didn't know that when we first really looked at this. I thought it was all 39 and through World War II. So the significance of this is really pre-World War I and an annex essentially to the Charlestown Navy Yard.
So this was built in 1903, and
This was built
Far
in
as-
1917, this
oh,
particular building.
okay.
But this land area was assembled in 1903.
so this has not been touched, we think, since 1917?
This building has not been touched. It's one of the few there that has not been touched. And some of the buildings that have been repurposed.
Well, the windows have been all
Yeah, that's true.
blocked in.
Yeah, the windows are gone, but when I say untouched, it's the basic structure and the walls and the roof profile. And what's missing are the old barn type, they had these tobacco barn-type ventilators on the roof. Those are missing, those are gone now. And, but other than closing in the windows and the doors, it's basically all there. The railroad siding is there, the entry area where you go in, that raised platform, that's a railroad siding. And you can see all the, when you look at this map, you can see the extents, all those black lines are all the railroad spurs that fed all these buildings. The other thing that was interesting in the World War I period, up through World War II, is that the Marine Guard that basically supervised or guarded this property was all on horseback. So there's a lot of lore that came out in looking at the history. I was fascinated at what exists in the archives, and when you look at this photograph, which came out in the packet, it's a little blurry, but what shows up in this photograph is all of these, you can see all these magazine buildings. Very few are left, but this is what you can see. So I think the significance of 52 in terms of its relative to the support of the World War I and World War II war efforts, and also it was used up through Korea too, the Korean War. The significance is that these buildings are an example, and the site, the undisturbed areas of the ammunition depot with the roadways and things, are basically all we have left of that era.
Gary, are there any of the bunkers that were dug into the hillside left?
Some of them are left, but most of them are filled.
Because to me, those are almost more dramatic, you know, because these buildings can be multi-purpose. I mean, the function was what it was, but the bunkers could only be a military
Well,
facility.
the bunkers were basically high ordnance and storage, whereas they all serve the same function. They were essentially storing ammunition.
Yeah, I was just thinking,
Gary and his, and/or his cohorts will be before the Historical Commission Monday evening
Yes.
to make probably a very similar, if not more elaborate presentation on whether this should be added to the inventory or not. I think for this evening, however, I think a lot of us would be interested in the cost proposal.
Yes, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to segue into that. What we've done, we originally started on this project where we were looking at 5 areas of the building in the original proposal that you have.
Do we have a supplement of anything in writing, or do
You have a supplement here, which I probably don't have enough copies of. I can give you this. What we've done is we've looked at the scope and we've reduced it to the areas that are absolutely not discretionary and the areas that would be required. And we initially had a scope of about $300,000 in terms of a funding request. But that scope was based on the complete, essentially repair, renovation, and restoration of the whole exterior of the building. We were talking about the roof, we were talking about the side walls, we were looking at the entry platform there, providing rails and stairs and new doors to get into the building. What we found is that in further developing the scope of the building, and we were also meeting over there in that monsoon rainstorm that we had, those 2 monsoon rainstorms, and I had no idea how badly the roof was leaking until you visit the building in the middle of a rainstorm. And what we decided to do is essentially ratchet back the scope and just look at the roof. Just do the roof replacement of the shingles, repair of any of the trim, repair of the sheathing, replace the original roof venting, the air venting, the ridge venting, and eave venting, essentially make the building watertight from the roof portion of the building, and defer the rest of the project to another time.
So would the roof construction be recreating the original appearance of the building?
It would be identical to the original appearance, so all of the original, for example, the cornice moldings, all of the eave moldings, all of the ridge moldings, which are all original, we would restore those and/or replace those where they're too far gone. So the exterior of the building would look identical. We would re-shingle. Currently, the existing shingling is an asbestos-based tab-tie shingling system, which looks like a slate roof, only it's asbestos. We would replace it with an asphalt roof. And we would also then repair and replace any of the sheathing below those shingles that are bad, and then we'd replace the ridge venting system so that the building is not heated, so it really depends upon natural convective ventilation to keep it dry. And that's where we decided to kind of draw the line. So it's really the roof and the related masonry areas that are adjacent to the gable and eave areas of the roof that have been damaged by the water.
Would you put the tobacco ventilators back on top? Or
We're
another
having,
time?
we'd like to, we're having a discussion with two of the roofers about that. The roofers would rather do a linear ridge vent for ventilation purposes. We like the ventilators because not only do they ventilate, but they go back to the original appearance. So having kind of a back, I'd like to do the ventilators if we could, but
Are these costs based on actual quotes or estimates?
this is an estimate from, we worked with Tom Bean Roofing, and let me give you his estimate. That summary is based on his estimate plus putting in a contingency. I just have to find it just a second.
Is this something that Roger has reviewed or been part of? Okay.
Yeah. It's a much, here it is here, it's a much lower amount. We got two, we talked with three roofers. We talked with John Bean, who gave us a written estimate. That estimate is updated by this memo, where he did not include the rake boards and the eave boards and things in that estimate, so we have a lineal foot adjustment, which is what adjusts the summary sheet up. The original roof estimate was, not that one. This estimate here also includes the removal and the disposal of the asbestos shingles. When we were originally looking at this, we thought, because in our experience with Building 112, we had a separate asbestos mitigation contractor. We thought we were gonna have to do that here, but because these are asbestos shingles, the roofers can take them. Whereas on the Building 112, they were the asbestos tiles, and that was a mitigation situation. So there was 30,000 in the original number on a separate disposal of asbestos, which we didn't have to do now, so that also reduced it. So we also talked with Devlin Roofing in Situate. They did the roof on the Model Railroad Club. That building is identical in size to this building, although it's been changed a little bit, it's identical. And their quote was within $1,000 less than this quote. So I know that these roofing quotes, I think, these are good quotes.
So this is 61 and 17.5. What are we looking at as a likely
What are you
cost of
requesting?
this?
Well, I'm thinking that with going through the roofing with the trim was $75,000. The original estimate is about 61, but when you take the other items that are not in it, it brings it up, and we put in 75. The masonry repair was 7,500. That's the areas immediately adjacent to the trim areas that are bad. We did not include any painting, because that's not something that's covered. We took that out. That was in the original proposal. The roofing contractor basically is, the subcontractor, but he's really the general for his scope, so we took out any monies for a general contractor for supervision. So the subtotal is $82,500, and then we put in a contingency of 15%, which is $12,375. So the total would be $94,875.
I have a question.
Sure.
We're talking about the money, but I guess I'm looking at from our notes last time about the criteria. So, I mean, I know we're not intending this to be a shrine.
Right.
It's meant to be a building. What's the long-term plan? I mean, with the barn, I can kind of see where that does look like an old building. It's adjacent to a rec center. There's a plan in place for the community. What's the plan for this building? 'Cause it's, I mean,
The long-term plan is that there are about 15 pieces of fire apparatus that are Hingham pieces that are part of the collection, the Fire Museum's collection, that are stored in this building but are not restored or basically ready to be exhibited. They have room in the Building 112 across the way for basically 4 pieces of more modern apparatus, engine-type apparatus, and then they've got horse-drawn apparatus in the small area, but they don't have any more room to store anything. So the long-term plan of this is that it's a facility where they can restore the fire engines, but it's also a facility where they can then display them. And then the idea would be that the building would be brought back to its original appearance, put the windows back in where they blocked in the windows, put in the doors at the 4 door entrances.
so I mean, in some ways we're starting to commit then
Well, you don't,
Cost unknown.
on the longer-term project, all of that can be done incrementally, and if the doors aren't put in now or aren't put in 3 or 4 years, it's not gonna compromise the integrity of the building. However, if we look at it as restoring the building as an example of, it's probably the last one left that will be in the condition that will look like, once it's done, would look like what was there in 1917. You could restore it to its original appearance and then use it for storing fire equipment and maintaining and exhibiting equipment, which is fundamentally what it was used for in the war effort. It's always been a storage building. But do it in such a way where you could offer the access to seeing some of this equipment to the public.
The other thing, Caroline, the people that belong to the Fire Museum are handy enough and might tend to do a lot of the work themselves. They've done.
It seems like it's a lot of money for us to, not to disparage anybody, but, for a very small group of hobbyists to spend a lot of money to go, it's a storage garage. It's a lot, to me, it seems like a lot of money for, storage.
The thing that I think is significant about the program that is being undertaken in these buildings is that, and what's unique about this fire museum is that basically their collection is a complete collection of Hingham apparatus and records and artifacts, whereas other museums might have a significant piece from this area, a significant piece from that area, or that community, whereas this is all Hingham equipment.
Not the stuff that's in the storage building.
Two of the pieces are not. Two of the pieces aren't.
Right,
But-
but it's not all Hingham, and I guess at one point you say we haven't, how much bigger is this gonna get? In other words, I don't know, it just seems like a lot of money for a very focused, very specialized hobby interest. And what's there now is very beautiful, where's it gonna go in the future, I guess,
I guess I see it as a town building, number one, which either needs to be preserved or allowed to disappear. In view of the fact that so many of these historic buildings have already been lost, that this is a significant historic asset of the town of Hingham. The kind of construction that's being proposed is preservation of the structure as a whole, and whether it's ultimately in the long term used for the fire museum or whether the town finds another way to repurpose it, I think the significant thing is to get it preserved so that we don't lose it.
Yeah.
Well, I should say,
I think we might
part of an
point out,
integrated long-term plan.
it's not just, I think the so-called hobbyists are doing a great service to the town and to firefighting history. And all the people that go there now and in the future benefit. It's not just for the handful of people that actually do the work, but I think they're making a contribution.
I do want to be mindful of time and of other people's proposals. Roger, these costs seemed in line from your perspective?
The only question I would have to Gary, and we didn't touch upon it, is we just have to make sure that the contract understands prevailing wage and there'd be a nominal cost for, not when we bid it out for bonding, and those associated costs would be a small percentage. So, other than that, it looks good.
Gary, could you get copies of these to Carol so she can circulate them to the entire committee and perhaps update us before our voting meeting on the 14th? So that we have the best numbers we have, and I'll let everybody know what the Historic Commission does next Monday.
Also, can we have a copy of the history?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Because I'd
include,
like to put that in the files on the
And-
third
and-
floor
and-
for Bear Cove Park.
and everything, I can give you this is the history, but I'll send this out. I can give you a hard copy of all this, Carol, tonight if you want, and I can send it digitally if you'd like.
Oh, definitely. Because I spent
Well,
a good
multi-
part of time trying to get a list of the buildings, and
Right.
remember?
Right.
One of the things
Right.
I wanted to, in closing,
It-
one of the things I wanted to put a plug in for is the reference librarian at the Hingham Library
Oh,
was amazingly helpful in finding this information.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Questions or comments from the public? Well, thanks so much, Gary, and best wishes to Jerry and Dick. I hope they're feeling better before Monday, and
Alone, you know?
And thank them for not coming and sharing.
Well, you were well versed.
Thank you.
and our next project is the Glastonbury Abbey Tower. Welcome. You are on local TV. So if you would kindly identify yourselves for the home audience, who may be watching you live or who may be going to the archives.
I need mine.
Once you're on the internet, you're there forever.
Oh, dear Lord. I'm Hayes Shea, and I'm the Director of Mission Advancement at Glastonbury Abbey.
I'm Chris Nagel. I'm the business manager at Glastonbury Abbey.
And we're here to talk about our stone tower and to address some of the issues that you brought up last time. So I'm just going to plow forward, Chris and I. Father Nicholas has the flu, so he couldn't be here. Yeah, 3 of the monks are down with the flu, so you're stuck with us tonight.
Right, wrong, or indifferent.
That's right. Okay, so I just want to reiterate the fact about the stone tower being 103 years old. I think last time Father Nicholas juxtaposed the 2 and the 1, and it was built in 1912, not 1921 like he said. And it's a very impressive, massive structure. You all got to take a look at it. And we feel that it not only represents Glastonbury Abbey, but it also represents the part of town, West Corner. And they consider it an important historical landmark in Hingham. And true, we're not in downtown Hingham, and nor are we a church on Main Street seeking funding, but we think that our sort of different location makes our requests even more compelling. Someone had brought up something about the usage. The Glastonbury Abbey itself has tons of usage these days, and so we think that that's going to follow through with the stone tower. We've had garden tours there that brought in 600 people. We had an open house that brought in 500 people. We have another one planned for this September. The Hingham Garden Club hosts their events there. We have the Atlantic Symphony Orchestra having a summer concert every summer on our grounds. And you can just see all the kids and the animals just gravitating towards that tower since it's set so beautifully up on the hill. We have picnics, dog walks, kids visiting the goats all the time. They love them. We have a labyrinth, and there are people, in the community and from all over who seek out labyrinths, and they come to the Glastonbury Abbey just to see the labyrinth. And of course, we have the community garden, and we have this really interesting peace pole. So there's so much to see there, and we feel like this would be another beautiful added place for them to be able to go in and see and view. We also have tons, we have an institute. We offer tons and tons of programs. This Thursday and every month we have a movie and with a dinner. That brings a lot of people. Next week we have a therapist coming to give a talk on depression and anxiety and spiritual health. We have a Tibetan Buddhist speaking next Thursday at the lecture series. We have a Martin Luther King breakfast that's put on by the Hull Hingham Religious Association. So it's a really, ecumenical, free, open to the public, really welcoming, open place there. And we also have, as you probably know, we host a lot of different community groups there. We have Al-Anon, we have AA several times a week there at the conference center. We've had prom for special needs kids. Our conference center is getting used more and more. So it'd be wonderful to have these 2 big rooms available in the tower for use for Hingham residents as well. I mean, it's kind of offbeat for a meeting place, but also extremely interesting. And at least we could be able to offer it to people. I said how we were on the Chronicle. I have to keep talking about how our usage and people and the popularity of the Abbey. So we have been on Chronicle featured with the Old Ship Church, which was pretty thrilling, as one of the highlights of Hingham. Okay, so this grant, now I'm just going to mention funding now, since that's what the big thing was about. This grant is for $25,600 something for roofing. Yes, it's the first phase of a bigger project, but we are asking you just to allow us to build a new roof for the tower. That is the first step. Even if that's all we ever got from you, at least we will be preventing further harm and damage to the tower, to the structure of the building. I know you're worried about us keep coming to you year after year, and we would never expect full funding from you year after year. If we're allowed to apply again, we would like to. We also will be applying to the Massachusetts State Historical Commission, to the Greenbush again, and we now have a development committee to discuss funding options for this at the Abbey. So we're not expecting you guys to fund the whole thing. Right now, we're just asking you to fund the roof, phase 1. The tower has it's the tower roof, the roof of the tower.
No,
Not the actual physical
no, it's the building, it's the tower.
Oh, yeah.
We have funding for the roof of the tower. This is for the L part of the building. We have funding to do that. Actually, the roofer that we have contracted with hasn't been able to come yet. He got, September, October, early November was terrible weather, and he got way behind, so I've been in contact with him. I'm hoping he's due to come sometime relatively soon.
Is that the Greenbush Fund?
Yes.
Yes,
So the Greenbush funding is gonna pay for
For the top one.
for the tower.
yes.
Correct. For the
16 by
top.
16.
And you're looking for basically 25,700 for the
For that
for
wing.
the long L
Yes.
wing. Yeah,
Correct.
okay,
Which underneath that are the 2 meeting rooms.
right,
Right.
right.
That building does not have bathrooms, does it?
Does not, no.
So that makes yes, I mean, it's hard to use if there's not a bathroom, right?
Well, right down the hill, the church is very close by, and there's bathrooms
Yeah.
right when you walk into the church.
Just in the vestibule of the church.
So
It doesn't have insulation either, it's a stone.
it's definitely seasonal.
Pardon? No, it was not.
No, it won't. No.
Mr. Watson, you had a
Yeah,
question?
please.
No, just, I went there, we went up to the top of the
Yeah.
tower, and I'm just visualizing the one-story part, it's part of the woodworking shop, I guess now. It looks as though it could be handicap accessible from outside. Is it a big grade?
You could access, handicap accessibility could potentially happen on the lower room level, because it comes in on grade. You'd have to get in, would have to make a space to park up at the top, and then a path to go down to that.
If you're talking about the possibility, I go to some of the sessions at the,
Yes.
I went to hear Corey go.
Yep, I saw you there.
But, you know, if you're gonna use it for public things, it really should be accessible to everybody,
Absolutely right.
sooner or later.
Right. Now, I know you also had a lot of questions about the budget and about our endowment fund, so Chris is gonna address that with you.
Well, is there a willingness on the part of the Abbey to participate in funding the cost of the roof?
Yes.
And have you
They would
reached,
prefer not to, but there is a willingness, yes.
The willingness of how we get there is another story. I'm not sure how we're gonna get there.
well, we're not necessarily talking about major dollars for this one roof project.
Not for this project, for the whole project, yes, that's, you know, over time, when we get that all done, how we fund the entire project is gonna be one thing. This particular project, we haven't had enough discussion about that yet to get to the answer, the yes answer. I
To the
should
big
say.
project, you mean, or
Are you talking about the big project, Bob, or just the roof?
No.
just the roof?
As I understand, and maybe Matt, you should chime in here, because I know you've had discussions with these folks.
I mean, we've,
you know, I guess I necessarily didn't distinguish that them receiving, you know, we're considering
Greenbush all-town money. I mean, I don't, that's how, it sounds like that's how you're thinking about it, towards the cost of the project. So, you know, as we've discussed the overall funding mix for the larger project, and then I've sort of said, well, we're not there. You know, this is a discrete project to save this building from injury, harm, and destruction, which is a purpose that the CPA fund was designed to do. I hadn't zeroed in on what's the Abbey specific financial participation for this discrete phase, but it's probably one that it's, you know, I'm not sure what the ratio is. Maybe it's a third of the, or two-thirds, I don't know, half the cost, I'm not sure. But I've essentially encouraged for the larger project to set that aside, to think about this as this one phase. Here's a discrete phase of a project to save a historic resource from further degradation. The other stuff, which I think we fixated on last time, was, well, this is a $500,000 project. Where's the money going to come from? Is the trust fund available? And those are things you don't have answers to right now. And so I think we shouldn't evaluate whether we're going to use historic preservation resources from the CPC for this discrete $30,000 project separate from the rest of the project. Is it's doing something on its own, whether we ever fund anything else, which I think is the point that Hayes made.
From the discussions that we've had at this committee, I don't think we're at a stage to even think about the much larger proposal that was presented to us. But that, as Matt said, I think we could think about, without making any commitment to anything in the future, this preservation aspect of a project. But as we've said repeatedly, you know, we are looking at contributions from proponents to leverage community preservation funds. And you know, you may not be in a position tonight to say that you're willing to do 2/3 or 50% or 1/3, but I think you should be in close contact with your project manager, Matt, before our voting meeting, so that we would have a very clear idea of what it is that you'd be willing to commit to.
Okay.
Does that seem fair?
Yes.
It does. Did we get lost in the first meeting with the scope of the project?
Yeah, I think we did.
Because
I felt like
we put together a pretty sizable, God bless you. Yeah, we have a 70-page document that outlined the whole project, not, you know, what we came to you folks for was a $25,000 roofing project, not $500,000 restoration of the building.
But there was one aspect that said, if this is going to be part of a bigger project, please give
Yeah.
us all the information, which hence we did so.
And I'm hoping that didn't cloudy the water too much.
I think
In all
our
of it.
questions were, you know, is this phase one of a 7-phase ask? And what the commitment was going to be of the Abbey to contributing to participating in any particular phase of that historical renovation. I think everybody loved the building.
Yes, right.
It is a unique building. But I think we've done well to get things more narrowed.
Yes.
And hopefully with a little more information provided to Matt before next week, we'll be in a better position to evaluate how people want to vote. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Or from members of the public? Well, any final words either of you want to add, share, Chris? Do you, I take it you don't have an answer to the $8 million endowment?
Okay, no.
$5
million.
Yeah, no, he
Wish it was
could
eight.
talk about that. We don't have an answer, that's the answer.
Yeah,
but-
and that is the honest answer. We have new legal counsel that we're in the beginning stages of the renovation of our office building. And we approached him about the same topic that Irma brought up the last time,
And his advice to us was, no,
No,
you're not gonna you're not gonna use the foundation money to fund that size project. That being said, I don't know how it's gonna play out a year from now or
Right.
18 months from now, when we're looking at another stage of the tower renovation.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because I think we've got enough on our plate to deal with
Right.
this discrete project. But, I mean, ultimately, we would probably want to see something from the Attorney General
Yes,
in terms of any future application.
And we discussed that.
sure.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we discussed that.
You guys were,
We have a new attorney working on
Yeah,
it.
we
We
do.
hired
Trying to-
we
Mike
just hired a new
Puzo.
attorney, Mike
Okay.
Puzo, a month and a half ago. He's
Great.
working.
He knows about this, you
Yes.
know, and your questions to us. I
Yes.
mean, so
He dove
he's
in
helping us.
head first to help us out.
Super.
yeah. So we will have answers for you next.
Wonderful.
If there is a next time. Oh, and and we have already kicked in 2,500 for, the study, by the O'Day, historical structure, the one who worked on the bell tower. Yes. So they came and did our stuff. So we have kicked it a little bit to begin with, and the answer is yes. We would kick in some more.
I don't wanna put the onus on
Yes.
them. I didn't make it clear that it's apparently my error, because some of the projects I don't know if we required financial participation of every applicant, even on modest projects, which I guess I looked at this as a modest project, and didn't say we need a 1/3 or a 2/3 commitment. I don't recall if there was a similar financial commitment on Second Parish Church last year. I just don't recall. I was thinking the financial participation from the Abbey's perspective was on the larger thing, which is what we've been trying to
Right.
address, not on this smaller thing. So I'm at fault, not them, in terms of making the hard case that they need to come up with 12,000 or 18,000.
It's never a fault game.
Yeah,
Well,
that's good.
Just a question of public discussion. We'll,
I don't want the onus to be on them.
Thank you.
no onus at
Thank you. No,
all,
we didn't
and
take so.
best wishes for a speedy recovery to Father
Okay,
Mark
thank you
Bone.
so much.
He's
Thank
gonna
you
be
for-
like half of the population. that's
If
gonna
he's
be down.
watching out there, we wish you well, Father.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very, very much.
And our next project is the Hingham Historics Commission gazebo restoration. We have Mike Dyer, Assistant Chair of the Hingham Historic Commission. And Mike, you brought a guest this evening?
I brought a guest.
Giles Parker, the National Park Service Superintendent for Boston Harbor Islands.
Very nice to have you here, Mr. Parker.
Thank you.
Last presentation, I think we went over this project from a very simple standpoint. Historic gazebo was originally part of Melville Garden. The concept is to restore that gazebo and return it to Ragged Island, which is part of the legislative boundary of the Boston Harbor Islands National Park area. Also part of the historical area that included Melville Garden. I know there were a couple kind of questions and concerns that came up, but you know, Giles wanted to kind of kick off, maybe provide a little more context about the park and the park's interest in this project. It's kind of a lead off. So.
Yeah, my apologies I couldn't make it last time, but as you probably know, or from the proposal as well, Boston Harbor Islands covers the 34 islands, over 50 square miles of the harbor, so including the 4 Hingham Islands, including Ragged. And it's kind of a unique park in the fact that the federal government owns very little of it. I don't know if you realize that part of it. I mean, we own 0.06 acres of the park. It was established for the Park Service to work with all of the island owners to preserve, protect, and make them accessible to the public. So that's the role we've played, and we haven't really played a real active role in almost 20 years of the park with the Hingham Islands. And we've really placed an emphasis there, or I have personally. Maybe it's my bias because I'm from the South Shore, or because I paddle in the Hingham Harbor over to Langley and Ragged on a regular basis. But actually, more so because, you know, this is a unique town. I mean, it's the gateway to the park out of Hingham Shipyard. You're home to one of the sites of the park with World's End, but also owners of 4 of the islands as well. So we work on a regular basis. We've been doing some projects with Ken Corson on scoping out some projects for Langley Island and looking at better ways to manage and activate Langley for the camping and activity there. Also for inventory and monitoring, we have a stewardship program to bring staff to monitor birds in a number of locations, particularly sort of Sarah and Ragged as well, but also our largely volunteer crew that comes out to do cleanup work as well. Right now in the winter, we're mainly working at Webb State Park and over at World's End, but during the spring and summer, we're also on the Hingham Islands, but also out to some of the DCR islands as well. Again, you have a letter of my support there, but literally for this project, but also future projects on the island, to support those projects.
I know a couple of the questions that came up were why Ragged Island, why the placement? As I mentioned, obviously, a key part of this from the Historical Commission standpoint was returning the gazebo to ideally a place where it was historically situated. Unfortunately, most of Melville Garden is now private property. There's very few areas left on Crow Point, being a Crow Point resident, living right around the corner from it. We've scoped that out and done that walk around and try to find a good public access place for it over there. We talked about at the last meeting, do we put this down at the bathing beach or somewhere along the inner harbor? Unfortunately, that's once again not part of the historical ownership of Melville Garden. It's also not part of the national park area, so we would potentially lose that tie-in and partnership, which I think is a valuable component of this project. One of the other things that came up was vandalism. Are we putting something out there that has the potential for damage? As I brought up at the last meeting, and I think Giles can speak to this as well too. We deal with 34 islands that have a wide variety of materials, ranging from very large forts like Fort Warren to other gazebo shelter type things, and vandalism is not a common problem that we deal with.
Yeah, actually, I thought it was a great question. It actually led me to look to see if we've got any data. Unfortunately, we have no specific data on it. It's all anecdotal evidence. But what I can say is vandalism is very low on the islands as a whole. Obviously, we have isolated incidents of graffiti on one island and trash in a couple of other islands. But on the whole, it's very good. And I think it's attributed to the nature of the park itself or the nature of the islands themselves. You come first time or repeat, and you want to own it. I mean, you want to really take care of it. So, I mean, I even recall paddling and going over to Langley and finding 3 people who had camped there for 20 or 30 years, and they consider it, their island, and so they want to take care of their island, which is a good thing to have those kinds of advocates for your park.
I guess I'm just struggling with, again, the placement of this. We have, we had for the barn, there was a comment about, you really enjoy history when there's life in it. Well, we're trying to put in a playground, and people are going to raise money to put in, like, a shelter. So there's a place it could be used. There's a beach where it could be used. I wonder about disrupting, I've used to row a lot, and you go by the islands, and there's a whole bird colonies there that I guess will all get disrupted once all their habitat gets taken down to put this up there. So it's disrupting an area when you could find places where people could enjoy it, see it, and make it more accessible. So I'm not quite sure about the sanctity of this location far out on an island that only people with boats can get to. To me, it's like, why not have people enjoy it, put it to use in town? No, it's not within the yardage of a certain historic district, but yet you could put a plaque on it, have a little thing about its history, and have people enjoy it. But sticking it out on an island, I don't know, it just to me seems, I don't know, purity for purity's sake, without when you could actually have people make some, get some real utility out of it. But
I think, let Giles kind of speak to some of the natural issues that could come up out of this. I do think one of the unique parts of this proposal and the concept of activating Ragged Island is the bigger relationship with the National Park Service. I mean, this is one of the most recognized brands in the world. The Boston Harbor Islands see over 500,000 visitors a year. This is something that is unique that Hingham has, being this gateway to a national park area. There's only 401 of them in the country. So thinking about, I agree with you. Sure, if we put this right in the center of town, could more people go to it? Could they read a plaque and learn about Melville Garden that existed over in Crow Point? But do we have maybe a better opportunity or larger opportunity from a public awareness standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, for the town to tie ourselves back to the National Park Service, something that is, you know, a draw, especially throughout the greater Massachusetts and Boston area. You know, 10 million people came to national parks. Correct, but
All right, that's all my point is.
but 500,000 people went to the Boston Harbor Islands National
Not
Park
to
area
Ragged
last year.
Island.
No,
Really attractive, and even from the shore.
Mhm.
And it hasn't been explicitly mentioned tonight, but we should mention that the Park Service and the Boston Harbor Alliance are contributing $10,000 to this project, which is a very significant contribution from an important partner to Hingham Town and waterfront government. I would personally agree with Mike's comments about this being part of Melville Garden. It really is the appropriate place to put it from a historical perspective.
Hey, Bob, can I make a point at that point? It's more or less across from Harmony Cottage, I think, isn't it? The Melville Gardens music director's house with all the bric-a-brac and trim.
oh, yes.
I'm quite serious. That's a very distinctive building, and when they expanded it, they kept it in that style. And in one sense, if you did a little guided tour, here's Harmony Cottage, here's the gazebo. Here's Kathleen paddling out to it.
I have a question in line with what Bob was, we're talking about alternative venues and places, and I actually think the linkage to the Harbor Islands National Park, which I enjoy and use and think is terrific. You know, there's connections with World's End, which is part of the system, as well as the ferry accesses from Hingham already. So there are other land-based linkages to the system. But your proposal is to put this on Ragged Island. You know, you didn't say it, but would you be contributing the matching funds if we were to say, oh, we'll put it somewhere else?
Put it in World's End.
I'm guessing not, but
Probably couldn't.
Outside of the legislative boundary of the park, no.
So-
Could you put it in World's End, because that's part of the
We
national.
could work on it there,
Because
correct.
then you'd
But
have people who could actually see it and appreciate it.
but with an admission charge. I mean, I love the trustees, but if you're not a member and you don't pay $8 to go, you've created a,
But you don't have to buy a boat.
yeah, but you've
Well,
put an
I
$8
would
person
also-
admission
Buy a boat.
charge.
there's the aspect of also, and your charge as well, I mean, preserving it where, in situ, I mean, where it came from as well. It's not part of the plan for World's End. It was never there. We're not gonna put it back to where it never was as well. So I don't think we would be part of that.
I mean, I've always been scratching my head to try, somebody sat and came up with this idea to begin with, to put it on Ragged Island. I mean, I've read this over and over, and it was on Elm Street. And then somebody came up with an idea that was an historic and great to restore. We're all here about historic preservation. But like some of the other members, it's hard for me to understand why you're asking us to preserve it and put it on Ragged Island. You're not saying, let's preserve something, and maybe let's think about where we can put it that might make sense. I mean, regardless of what the price may be. So if somebody has this idea that Ragged Island is the
The
only place
Historical
to put it.
Commission actually looked into, over the course of a number of meetings, alternate places to put this gazebo. It happened to end up in Elm Street, probably as an accident of history, that somebody grabbed it from Melville Gardens. And it's like various pieces of historic fabric get distributed over the course of time.
Just like the ticket office.
No, it wasn't originally on Elm Street.
Well,
And
just like the ticket office.
But it's not originally.
I was the same way as well when I first saw this proposal. I knew Ragged Island. I went, why there? And one of the first books I'm handed was the King's Handbook. And it didn't take much research to see the image there and to see the image of the gazebo and go, there they are. You know, you don't always find that connection so easily, but to see them together and say, there is where it belonged historically.
And- No, go ahead.
Will this theoretically draw more people to Ragged? Because Ragged's really pretty, but.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, it is a small island. I don't think that it's anything that we or the town of Hingham are going to actively promote as a major tourist destination. But I do think, I mean, to your point, is, again, I've been paddling in the harbor for quite a while. 2 or 3 years ago, I was the only one. Now, there's a lot more people in kayaks there. REI's over in the shipyard. There's a lot more people coming. So I think it is one more place, again, maybe not to stop, but as that visual from the water or from over at Crow's Point, I think it's an amazing asset for the park and for the town.
Who takes care of it once it's there?
I think there's, we have commitments right now from both the Island Alliance, the Friends of Hingham Harbor, which is another nonprofit group, Amy Cowan. And we've also have interest from the Friends of the Boston Harbor Islands in providing, monitoring, if that's what you want to call it, the care and maintenance and going out there on an annual basis during the summertime, kind of the opening and closing. And then as Giles mentioned, the National Park Service operates basically what they call stewardship Saturdays throughout the season. They've got one coming up at World's End this coming weekend. So getting that stewardship crew going back out there, to help maintain it, and is obviously as part of this proposal and some of that contribution from Island Alliance from the National Park Service is the site preparation. And, it needs some cleanup out there. There are some Town of Hingham benches that are currently out there that have been out there for a while that are a little buried, that need to be unburied. So some of that work is going to take place as part of this as well too, going forward.
Has the Historical Commission voted or made a recommendation on this project?
Oh, yes, the Historical Commission is very much in support of this project. And Melville Gardens was a very significant historic feature of the town of Hingham. It's a shame that some of the Melville Gardens buildings weren't preserved. And when you look at this gazebo structure and compare it to the sketch in the proposal on Ragged Island, I mean, it is a dead match for it. So yes, the Historical Commission is very much in favor of this project and this location.
I mean, I guess as the CPC, I mean, we're looking to the Historical Commission for their body's assessment of this. If you said it was a crazy location or invaluable resource, then we would consider that. And
we actually looked at locations on Crow Point. We looked at private locations. We looked at public locations. I mean, some of the problems with some of the things that have been thrown out are, there are other governmental bodies involved, the trustees or the town or the trustees of reservations, the trustees of the bathing beach. And I do want to be mindful of time. If there are no further comments from the committee or questions from the public, I especially want to thank Mr. Parker for being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate, sure, Roger.
The estimate for the project, is that included in your packet?
There's a breakdown on, there's an original construction estimate that is in the back, and that was one that was presented to the Historical Commission. Granted, it's about a year old now, and that was just for repairing the structure itself, basically redoing the conical roof, re-sheathing it, and then rebuilding the 4 posts and the benches.
Is that the $1,280?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what that does not include is any of the transportation, site preparation, any of those other pieces were not included.
So you're still just asking to Roger's point, $12,500?
Correct.
And that'll do it all?
Correct.
Including with the in-kind support.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, if that's something you can send to Carol, however whatever you gather the dollar values.
Yep.
That would be great.
Sure, no problem at all.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Giles. Good luck on World's End this weekend. I think it's going to get a little bit warmer.
Geez, I hope so.
We haven't hit the bottom yet.
And it looks like it's probably a good time for a 2-minute recess, because we've had a few members run out of the room, so if,
While we have the next group come in and.
let's take a 2-minute break before we go on to 111 High Street. The 60% point of the night, and a few people wanted to run outside for a moment, so. guess we're just waiting for Roger. Okay, why don't we go ahead with 111 High Street? Thanks for being here, Mr. Sherwin. Nice to see you again.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year. What would you like to tell us?
Well, I'd like to tell you that everything's fine, let's go forward.
That was simple.
Just for, by way of an executive summary for the folks at home, the 111 High Street, the community garden project, was brought by Mr. Sherwin to this committee for potential funding. Mr. Sherwin has impressed me as knowing 5,000% more than I know about farming and how to grow things, and I'd certainly love to learn at his feet. Community garden, I think, has impressed us as a great idea. Seemed to me the point we got to right now is organization, getting somebody to run it. I know there's some land issues, and I guess the idea has come up about the potential for a short-term lease and/or a lease with option to buy, perhaps, as a way to see whether this was a good way to move forward. Do one of you want to address where we are on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Scott brought that up to me. I think it's probably a good idea because nothing's going to happen probably right away because of the circumstances. Number one, it would, what's the amount, the lease? I have no idea. Someone has got to come forward with something that maybe is fair. And the other thing is, I would have to make the present lot where I live on conform. I think we all went through that already. In order for me to sell the lot on number 111, 303 acres. And if it's leased, then part of the money, I would agree to pay for the engineer to make that commitment. In other words, making it conform. Okay? Now, being said that's done, let's say it's done, and the town for some reason can't or won't buy the lot. And I've got to go ahead and hire an engineer, maybe a lawyer, maybe a botanist, in order to take that 330 acres and add it onto my present lot. Follow me so far? To make it one big bundle. Okay? So down the road, if my wife has to or wants to sell, she could probably pick up 100,000 more than normally than she would have if that lot wasn't combined. Now,
Well, you could sell the two parcels together right now, couldn't you, Gary? You could sell them together right now.
I could sell them together.
Yeah,
I don't want to right now.
I understand. But I don't think you'd need an engineer or a lawyer to address that.
I have been told that I have to have a brand-new surveying done.
I think that's only if you subdivide the lot.
Right.
If you sell us the agricultural portion, you have to convey a certain portion of that parcel to the parcel with your residence, so you have conforming frontage.
Is that a very large piece? The amount you need to add to your house?
It's 50
foot
foot.
linear frontage, then that would be angled back toward this
So
current.
it's not a big chunk of the proposed garden.
No, it wouldn't really have any impact on the garden
In
area.
terms of the process, if you wanted to allocate some of the property that's in the adjacent lot to your lot, you'd have to come in and file with the planning board a Form A, which is an approval not required, but it's a record drawing, which would require a surveyor to do that. If you were to,
If the town doesn't buy it, then my other option, as far as I'm concerned, is to add the whole thing together. And I would still have to go through the planning board for a whole new plan. And so the money that I pay, let's say I spend $2,000 to make the present lot conform, that's down the drain, because I gotta go ahead and do the whole surveying over again to add that other lot onto my present one.
This is,
But that's
this is certainly
not really germane.
some details that, we only have a 15-minute, or actually less than that at this point. So I want to try to draw this.
We've got about another 10 minutes to go because we were a little behind and we
That's
took a
good,
break.
Yeah, I want to certainly kind of rehash some other parts of this project that I think need to be augmented or demonstrated. Because when it first came before the committee, clearly the objection was primarily the issue of who's gonna run this show, who's gonna be the point person entity that's gonna manage the garden. Obviously, you can't just say it's there and let people just go and do their thing. That fact has not yet been addressed. We have some very interested parties. We knew it was important to start getting some grassroots efforts made to determine what is the interest in this type of project. It's very unique. Certainly, it's something that people in the town have expressed an interest. I think we can safely say there are at least 20 people, some of whom are present tonight, who are very interested and very qualified gardeners that can really manage this land probably on their own. But that is an issue that we know has not yet been addressed and certainly is not ready for a vote of yes or no on going ahead with the purchase. That's really the biggest issue, because the surveying, that kind of matter, can be resolved with fairly short monies and fairly easily in a reasonable period of time. But coming to this meeting tonight, it was pretty well, at least in my affairs opinion, that it would probably reach some objections because of the issue of the governance, the surveying, and issues about how much more costs, obviously buying land, how do you handle insurance, how do you handle the water for a garden, how do you handle electricity. All of these things Leo is aware of. He's fully understands what needs to be done, and none of them seem to be really deal breakers, but they're not ready. So this issue of leasing is something that actually Roger Fernandez, I believe, was the one who brought this to my attention, that maybe we could find some middle ground here. This might be a way that we can at least get this project rolling, get people involved, get Leo, certainly he's willing and able right now to start, using this land with friends. He wants to get the public involved. He'd like to see this become a community property. And so that goal hopefully is not lost in these other details that seem to kind of raise their little heads. So that's the big, my opinion anyhow, that's the big question is there a precedent for a town leasing land from an individual owner for this purpose? I know that there are owners who lease town land from the town for agricultural purposes.
I looked at the CPA itself, and the language of the Community Preservation Act specifically permits a town to lease land for open space type of use. So I don't see that there's any legal impediment to a lease.
Bob, is that then better than an option to purchase?
Well, I think from the viewpoint of the town, to the extent that the town wanted to enter into a lease, it would make sense to include at least some right of first refusal language or option to purchase language. All of that would have to be negotiated. I think were this committee to recommend a lease, we'd have to have a proposed lease amount, and it would have to be subject to working on appropriate lease language and terminology once town meeting adopted the recommendation. But it seems to me that we've got a lot of willing people that would like to go in that direction, and it could be worked out.
But I'm concerned that governance is governance, and it's one thing to have people say, I'd like to be involved. Who's going to run this? And whether you're leasing the land or buying the land or getting it for free, the whole governance thing really needs to be worked out. Here we are, 7, 8 days before voting. Ideas are supposed to be well thought out. And to me, this feels a little early, that there should be a plan, like, coming to this to say there's a plan. This is not who's interested in participating, but who's gonna run it. And how are all, when disputes happen, and all the thought process from start to finish gets worked out. So to me, it seems like, I don't know, again, I thought we had kind of a general feeling that it was just not really quite thought through in terms of how this organization, of which it is an organization, is gonna work. I don't think it's just people showing up with a shovel in hand and starting to dig in the ground and claiming, like, you know, like prospecting out west. You just claim your land.
Ideas about how to set it up, but, you know, we've got probably about 10 to 15 rules and regulations from other community gardens.
But nothing's been codified
So we
and
have a
agreed
sense
to.
of what
Well, and
is needed.
I completely understand where you're coming from, Kathleen, and I know that would be, if we were looking at a purchase and expending the $60,000 plus, that would be clearly a big stumble block. The lease idea, fortunately, is a much more moderate or minimal amount of money to expend, and that would at least, you wouldn't be sinking a lot of money into something where you don't know what's gonna happen. I'm very confident that even if this, can I say the Hingham Land Conservation Trust, they're the ones, at this point, they haven't said no. Let's put it that way. We have approached other entities, and they've clearly said, no, we don't have the time, we don't have the ability, we don't have the structure. So without saying that this puts it in their hands that they have to say yes now, I know that can't be done, but I'm pretty confident, based on everyone I've spoken with and what I've seen happening, that that could be developed for a very short investment of monies. And if this turns out to be just not workable, or we find that it doesn't have the proper governance as you would like to see, then, well, it may not be. You know, that's primarily that's not known because we're just, because of the holidays and the fact it's kind of gotten, this is not like our first shot. We've approached other entities. You know, Janice McPhillips, who was here previously, she took a very strong and quick commitment to look into options for us.
We have a couple of questions.
Yes, and
Irma, and then Matt.
I'll stop talking. Sure.
And
Scott, what do you see if a lease were to happen? What do you see happening between the day the lease gets approved, or the ability to do a lease from town meeting, and a year from now, when the project comes back? And then secondly, has anybody thought through, if the town leases this, what the liability to the town is if someone gets hurt?
It's, that question has been raised. I was, either I've agreed, understood it or not. And I don't know the answer to that. I guess in some ways I'd say, well, the town owns a lot of open space. If someone trips and falls and hurts themselves on any open space in town, what is the liability of the town? So I don't know if being a garden, a community garden, raises the stakes, if you will, of what could constitute a liability. So that's something needs to be vetted. And I think that's why the lease would allow for a pretty nominal fee, a chance to really address that issue among many others, and there are many others issues. And my bottom thing I'll say is that if we decide no lease, no go, bring it back next year, I can't speak for Leo, but there is a chance that during the course of the year he might have other opportunities, and then we're in a situation, well, okay, we don't get a garden there, which wouldn't be the end of the world. But if the town is truly intent on establishing a community garden, this location, the fact he's been gardening it for so long, it's already ready to go. It's not like new land we need to go out and start grubbing and checking the soils and knowing how to get water. I mean, he's really done all that for us. So, okay.
Yeah, I thought, and I appreciate Bob, examining the statutes to see that. I actually thought you were going to say it wasn't legal to I thought you had to acquire real property interest. I'm trusting that you read the law correctly. But what I thought was gonna happen was that this ad hoc group would form into a more organized, formal group, sort out all these, all the things that are gonna come up, because who knows what's gonna come up as you examine how do you run this. And it's kind of hard to think how you're gonna do it without actually having a piece of land to work on. It's sort of just an abstract concept. But I was thinking that the citizens of Hingham, in whatever this group is, we're going to enter into a lease, figure out the organization, and have that be their sort of the in-kind matching sort of contribution from this group, and then come back to us a year from now and say, well, we got this thing up and running, we've leased it, however you raise the money to do that, and then come back and say, this is going, now we want the town to buy the land. Not for the town to lease it and then come back a year later. But that was...
Would Concom take ownership of seeing that governance is worked out?
No, that's another entity that said it's would be outside of the Concom's. I mean, our conservation officer, she's wonderful and is a very hardworking, diligent person, but I don't think, there's a trails program that's coming into play. That's another matter we can discuss later, but.
Is there anyone that has been identified that is a town agency that would take ownership of seeing that the governance happens?
The only one that I could say comes to mind is the Hingham Land Conservation Trust, but I am not a trustee. We do have a member here. He has said he's brought it up with some members, but they haven't actually had a formal meeting to vet this project.
Is that something that could happen before our voting meeting?
Is there? Oh, that's right, Tony's on. Very.
Corky, do you want to speak? Yeah, I'm the president of the Hingham Land Conservation Trust. Microphone, please. Where's the microphone?
Right here.
Okay.
There's one right there as well.
All right, standing up. Good evening, my name is Charles Wilsey. I'm the president of the Hingham Land Conservation Trust. I've walked the property with Leo and some of the other interested people, and it's a very interesting project. Due to the holidays, we weren't able to meet, and I know the governance issue really is a big issue for you. It's also a big issue for us, so I can't say we dive into this, but people have expressed interest, and it does seem within our mission. However, we are a nonprofit. We're not really affiliated with the town. But we do have a board of trustees, and we have a certain amount of income, and we're interested in supporting this, but we can't offer anything officially. But I think the lease option, having us involved in the lease, would be very difficult. That sounds too complicated. I have a hard time seeing pulling this together this year with us involved. That's just a realistic assessment, because I know we would have a lot of concerns that we would have to research.
Could you let Scott know the results of your deliberations on Thursday night?
Right. I think everybody will be interested, but there'll be a lot of reservations, so we'll need more research.
Gary?
Yes, no, we do have 3 properties at Hingham. We do have land, and we do have insurance, so we do have a governing board.
Gary, you had a question?
I did, before I forget it. One of the questions that I had was, there are a number of very successful community gardens organizations that have been going for a long time, and when I think of one, I think of the Fenway, which is basically in Boston, where that's a very successful community garden. There's areas of land that are clearly marked out for the participating gardeners on the land. Is there a model on a smaller scale? Is there a precedent model, a management model for this type of a garden that would be appropriate for this site as a management entity? Because I'm not sure of all of the management aspects that have been presented. I haven't seen how this is going to be deliberated over time. And is it run like a small land condominium where you buy a share in this garden that is owned by, the land would be ostensibly owned by the town. It would be managed by I'm assuming the Conservation Commission, but then under the Conservation Commission and reporting to the Conservation Commission would be a Community Gardens Corporation, I'm wondering, that would manage all of the allocation of the space, would manage any of the disputes, would manage the monies that people would be paying for the right, I'm assuming, to use that particular part of the plot of land. Is there a precedent that you've looked at that would be appropriate for this piece of land, that would be a guide or would be a template for that kind of a management program?
Janice would be the best person to answer that.
Sure,
Because she
sure.
has done some good
Sure.
John, have you
inspection on that, yes.
Hi, Janice McPhillips, 34 Franklin Rogers Road. So at the meeting in December, I spoke about that briefly. I did a bunch of research in advance of that meeting and got some bylaws and some information about one of the Boston Public Gardens, not the one in the Fenway. It's in Roslindale. And actually a teacher at Plymouth River School has a garden plot there, and I went and visited it, and she gave me a copy of the bylaws, and it's run by a committee of volunteers. There's no paid staff. There's no one from the city of Boston who's managing it. It's just a group of citizen volunteers who run it. I visited the Hull Community Garden. That's just a member of the Hull Garden Club who organized it, took it upon herself. She, actually forget who, the Garden Club of Hull would not sponsor her. I forget who she allied with. I have it in here somewhere, but it's, for insurance purposes, they collaborated with, oh, here we go, Hull. I can't find it, but anyway, and in Situate, there's a model in Situate, and same thing, it's run by a committee of citizens, so.
So the responsible party for the management of the property isn't the town, the responsible party is this nonprofit organization that would manage it?
Well, it's a bunch of people who do it because they're interested
Sure.
in making this happen, and for insurance purposes, they've allied themselves with a nonprofit. I forget who it is in Hull, and in Situate, it's Sustainable Situate, which is a local nonprofit. So, and then Jim put me in touch with a woman from Easton, is that what town? There are 2 community gardens in Easton. I spoke to the woman who is the town planner, I guess is her position. And one is managed by a land trust, and the other is managed by a agricultural commission.
Sure.
We're going to have to move on, just in the interest of time.
Sure.
I suspect that there is some oversight from the governmental bodies. And was there someone from Open Space that was going to speak? Yes. Amy, thank you.
Hi, Lori Freeman, 9 Sanborn Road. I can be very brief, because unfortunately, a lot of this just developed since we last met mid-December. So, really, at that point, we were not aware of that there's been a lot of creative thinking going on since then. Up until that point, there really did seem to be a lot more work to be done. So while it seemed very promising, the project, and certainly fits fits 2 key priorities that we have at Open Space. One being the community garden is actually in the Open Space plan, as everyone is aware, and then also just, maintaining the streetscape landscape, open space we can use more in that area, et cetera. There's a lot of really great reasons to support it. There were significant barriers, which have already been discussed. So I can't, as one of 3 on the committee, I can't possibly obviously commit in any way as to whether or not our position at this point, other than to say that we were cautiously optimistic that perhaps this was going to mature as a project in the future. So I'm sorry to be vague, but I just don't have the authority really to say much more than that. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Laurie. And Jim Morris did provide a note to me with respect to the views of open space, essentially indicating that with respect to 111 High Street, the feeling was that this would probably take another cycle to work through issues and challenges for all the reasons we've looked at tonight. That 875 Main Street is property with multiple obstacles. 149 Rockland was the most attractive, but that's being withdrawn. And in general, open space would like to see a reserve for future open space funding. So unless there is something else that absolutely has to be said about 111 High Street, I think we...
What's the order of magnitude in terms of the lease value?
I know.
How much lease value we talk, maybe you guys discussed?
Yeah, we're not.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
I've got too many people speaking at
I was
once.
asking if the people who have shown interest that have written in could be the core of the governance body and could get together and develop rules in the near future. I mean, some of them sound quite interesting.
Oh, there is big interest, yeah, the people who have expressed.
Time is
to-
perilously
yep.
short.
Yeah, Rod?
Time is perilously short. Before we vote, for something like that to happen, Roger's question is essentially, is there a number in terms of lease value that you're looking at?
Am I looking at?
Right. I take it you have a generally open mind to.
Yeah, it's open most of the time. Yeah, I'm guessing, and it's only a guess on my part, maybe wishful thinking, but for the reasons I suggested before, that if the town doesn't buy it, then I've got another big expense, unknown to me what it is.
Well, I commend you for bringing this to the town. I think it's a really public-spirited offer that you have engaged in and are personally willing to be involved in. And it seems to me that if we had to, Scott, you mentioned in an email, I think earlier today, something like $2,000 as a possible lease.
I'm not a lease person, I don't know, I know that people lease property from the town for very short money. But this was the idea of the survey, which that's where we're caught in this loop, where he doesn't want us to be spending money now.
Is that a number that would be acceptable to?
Well, we thought that would be, at least that would cover his cost to get the survey done.
In my opinion,
at a-
that's not enough.
Okay.
For the reason I spoke before, that if the town doesn't buy it, then I've got to go through the whole process again to add this 3 1/3 acres onto my present lot in order to sell the whole thing. And so that money that I spent, $2,000, whether it came out of my pocket or out of the lease agreement, is down the drain.
Could you refine your thinking on a lease amount and get to Scott about such a number before next week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, we need to move
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
to the second parish. I thank you, Mr. Sherman. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks to Open Space.
We can fill a room, but nobody steps up to say, I'll take the lead.
Scott has now managed to double his time on every discussion.
I just think if you don't have an organization, you can't do it.
I tend to agree with you.
And I don't think we should be leasing it for a year. Let the other group lease it for a year.
Well, we can save that for our voting meeting.
I like your idea of contacting Mark Collins.
Yeah,
Contacting what?
Mark Cullings. Do you know Mark?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Great idea.
I mean, farmer's market, community garden,
One of the things I worry about is parking where he is.
well, he'd have to do something with it.
Yeah.
Land and what other benefits?
Triple your allotted time.
Great. There's a lot of
Thanks, Lisa.
No.
Thank you.
Did we require them to come up with matching funds last year? For their
No,
plan?
not for their 8 or 10,000, whatever we gave them. We did not. And it was largely because it was just for planning only, and I understand. And, but no, we did not.
Okay.
We mentioned that we would expect to see substantial matching funding. Hi, Lisa, you ready to go?
I'm ready
Welcome.
if you're ready.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisa Shetty, 175 East Street. I'm representing Second Parish on behalf of our handicap access project. Since our last visit, it's my understanding that there were a few concerns that I'm going to try to address tonight. The first one is the historical issue. So I guess the historics needed to be involved in the loop sooner than they were. So I've submitted an application that's the certificate of appropriateness, but I wasn't able to get it in for their December meeting, and I did get it in by their December 18th deadline, so I think we're on schedule for the January meeting.
And if it'll save a little time, I've talked to Andrea Young from Historic Districts Commission. Historic Districts Commission is going to address both Second Parish and the Congregational Church at their January 29th meeting. That won't be until after we vote. However, she doesn't anticipate that there is going to be any substantial issue raised or anything that is going to substantially affect the cost.
Okay,
So
that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's really the historic nature of the building that's driven the whole process anyway. I mean, if we weren't concerned about it, we would have just stuck a ramp on it and be done with it. So that's the historics. The second issue is kind of tied to the fundraising. So there were some questions about the budget that I submitted at the last meeting, and that not every line item was addressed. So we went back and we just tried to put in, for a couple things like paint and landscaping, we just included material cost at our best estimate and said that the labor would either be donated or that the church crew would do it, just to kind of eliminate those to be determined items from the budget. And I think that's fairly realistic, that we could hopefully get some of those, you know, maybe supplies even donated. So it really is just an estimate, but it didn't really change the budget all that much to add in the material costs, but it did, I think, help with any ambiguity that was in the budget. And then the other update is in our fundraising. So I understand that the CPC doesn't like to fund the full amount. When I submitted the application in October, I indicated on the application that we could probably raise $50,000. That's what we were willing to commit to. When I came in December, I said that we were confident we could raise $65,000. So tonight I can tell you that we're confident we can raise $75,000, because we are far enough along in our campaign and we've had some really generous pledges and donations. And we're just rolling out this brochure that I passed out to you. So the donations that we've received so far are mainly from the congregation and some friends and neighbors that we solicited. This is going out to businesses that we've identified that either have an interest in Hingham or in South Hingham, have an interest in the food pantry, they support them in some way. So it's places like Hannaford's and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, but it's a lot of more local businesses also. And then we're going to kind of recanvass the community, like just neighbors and friends again. And the goal for that is we had gone for sort of the larger sum donations in our initial process, and now we're hoping that multiple smaller dollar amounts will add up to help us in our fundraising efforts. Unfortunately, I don't know how that is all going to pan out. Hopefully it's a success. Confident. We have a great fundraising committee, obviously, but just...
It sounds like you're doing extremely well in terms of fundraising. Keep up the good work. Roger, have you looked at these costs?
Yeah,
At the last meeting?
except with some of the material costs added in for things like paint and landscape and seed and loam and things like that.
Put together by a professional firm that does estimating, so that's one of the criteria allowable under the guidelines. So, yep, we've looked at this, yep.
So you think they're realistic?
Yep.
And I understand the present amount you're looking for is $116,565.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So that's the 196 less 75,000.
Which leaves a couple thousand off, but.
Yeah, I think it's changed because before it might have been like 191. So I guess if you minus the 75 from that, it would be more like 121.
And Gary, you're the project manager on this?
Yes, I just wanted to commend Lisa's abilities in planning and managing this process and looking at the history of how far we've come from the initial plan of a ramp
Thank
that
you.
was a purely functional ramp, was on the north side of the church. It worked really well, but it had a whole series of issues, and they were open-minded and looked at rethinking it so that it worked well, not only functionally for the patrons, the people who would use it, not only the congregation, but the food pantry. But I think the evolution of the design on the south side of the church has really been amazing in terms of really solving the problem in a nice way. And I think the development of the scope and the costs has been quite detailed. So this has been a great process.
Yeah, I was similarly going to commend you, and also just ask, I guess, a question for, I don't know, for Gary or Bob. Are all the things in this list permissible under the Community Preservation Act?
Well, I was gonna ask the same kind of question.
Like
Are they all
wall
related?
cabinets?
Are
or-
they all related to ADA access? It would seem that,
I think when you look at the plan that's in our original submission, but also when you look in the plan that's in the fundraising document in the brochure, in order to do,
It's right there too.
and larger scale on the board,
I couldn't move it any closer without.
in order to do the primary functional aspects or meet the functional program, which is the accessibility, and do it in a way that's integrated into the architecture and the scale of the church, the building of the church, it seems to me that there are primary elements to make that happen, but then there are a series of ancillary support elements that it's all part of the same equation. You couldn't really isolate them out. In other words, in order to
everything here is,
interrelated.
things are being disturbed,
Right.
in order to make ADA access possible. And so that's why you feel everything is qualified? Okay.
I hope HCAM is able to pick up what it looks like, because it really
Thank
is
you.
beautiful. And it blends in as though it were there.
Well, I think that's
always.
part of the inherent cost that you're looking at, is just to achieve that goal so
Right.
that it actually does blend in. And I think the other beauty of the project is that the location of the entrance is into Cushing Hall primarily and not into the sanctuary. So it really does, I mean, Cushing Hall, as we've indicated in our pamphlet, is really the entry point for all functions, non-religious or even religious on Sundays. But it's not like it's a ramp just going into the sanctuary. It's really a ramp into the functional space as different people use it for different purposes.
May I ask a question? Lisa, I was just wondering, I noticed in your brochure that you talk about, the goal is to, if everything happens, according to plan, construction to begin spring or summer. How long construction period? I mean, will it be
I
ready this
just
fall?
talked to Michael about that. I was kind of hoping that he could get it done shorter than June to September, but he said it really is a June to September project. Yeah. And I think realistically, having gone through things like this myself before, it will be a usable, functional space by September. Will it be totally like, everything? Yeah, there's gonna be
But
stuff.
it won't affect,
It won't affect, it'll be safe, it'll
people
be
to get
mostly
through,
done, it's
the
just,
front entrance,
yeah.
in order to go to the pantry, et cetera.
right.
Will your fundraising dollars be cash in hand by that time?
Yes, yes,
will.
yes. We've had a number of people that have given their donation in the interest of doing it by the end of 2014, and some people will wait to give it. But Sue, do you know? This is Sue Biden. She heads up our fundraising committee.
I think the deadline for funds.
Use the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Can you use the microphone?
Sue Biden, I think the deadline is the end of May, that all funds need to be in by then. Because we want construction to begin as soon as that nice weather comes.
And I think we're fundraising pretty much right up until that point. So we're not, taking anything for granted. We're just gonna keep going at it.
Lisa, are you looking at a revised number then, or keep to the 116, or are you moving out to 121? I just
think,
want to be clear on what you're
yeah.
asking.
I think right now we have to move it up to 121, but we can, I don't know if we can amend that at some point, like before town meeting or before you guys vote.
So the difference is 121, 671.
We have to put a recommended number in a warrant article.
Oh, okay.
And so once we vote on a recommendation, our hands become somewhat tied
Mm-hmm.
in terms of going backwards. I mean, you might, and we might at our voting meetings, you know, because of conflicting and competing needs for funds for the different projects, you know, we might conceivably ask you to think about fundraising a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Lisa, I have a question just on these numbers. There doesn't appear to be a contingency and.
There is, it's built in.
Oh,
There is a margin for, you know, elasticity as one item might go up, the other one might come down. You know, and when
Yeah.
you take away that contingency, the number could be more like 160, but, you know, you're going into an old building.
Right, right.
You know, you're digging down where there's known ledge, so we have
Yeah,
to
just wanted
kind
to
of.
be sure it wasn't like overlooked.
No,
in
we've
each
definitely.
item.
Huh? I'm
It's
sorry?
embedded in each
Yes.
item.
so Roger, do you think this is a project where conceivably we'd have funds coming back to us?
Well, I think that sort of depends on,
The
you know,
fundraising.
on with the money, and then how you eventually bid the project out and where those values come in. I
Mhm.
think that's a good question in that, you know, we'd like to see you bid the project in such a way that you get more than just one contractor
Yep.
who provides you with the price, and
Yep.
then as long as the scope of work is the same,
Mm-hmm.
then if there's a potential savings there, if the request goes in at 121 and you only need 115, and it goes into the article as 121, you just don't spend the other $6,000. So,
Right,
I mean, with all these projects, that we're not trying to spend to what's been
no.
appropriated, but rather just enough money to do
Right.
the actual job.
And with each different item too, like for foundation, for example, and electrical and paving, you know, we definitely get multiple bids on those things as well.
And just a question for Roger. Unlike the town buildings, which have all the public prevailing wage and those requirements, these don't, even though there's public funds in the project. It's a private entity. Okay, just want to make sure that's clear.
I'm sorry.
He's gonna ask Siri.
What's going on?
Yes.
Lead in that direction.
Any other,
I didn't know I had that feature.
any other comments or questions from the committee? Any
Thank you.
comments or questions from the public? It's come a long way since
Looks great.
Yeah,
we first saw it.
thank you.
A lot of
Yeah,
great-
I can really appreciate that process, you know, seeing some people who are coming in for the first time. So I, you know, have a lot of sympathy and a lot of appreciation for how this process works, having gone through it. So don't necessarily want to do another one. I'm good. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for all your
Right.
tremendous work.
All right,
Thank you. And almost last, but not least, 132 Scotland Street.
I guess that's the money. There's some things I don't know how you pay for it. Is driveway paving count? True, I mean, do we just parse that out?
We-
Are they on?
Yeah, and you're on the mic now. Ready when you are.
I'm filling in for Bob, and I'm really literally getting like
to say?
He's-
pretty much. I'm like, okay, give me, you know, let me know.
He should give you the earphone.
Is he, does he have the flu too? That would be.
He is under the weather,
Oh,
so
no.
they've
Oh, boy.
asked me to come in to answer
Boy.
questions. Stephanie McHugh, 17 Howland Lane. chairperson of the Housing Commission. Okay. Do I need to repeat that? Okay. All right. So the proposal that we submitted included a realm of things initially, and we did send the updated proposal, which I believe everyone should have received, so that the revised cost would be a little over 34,000. That focuses mostly on the window replacement and repair. The structure itself is being utilized. We intend to keep it as affordable housing, and we're looking to basically restore and maintain and keep it in good shape so we can continue to offer that as an affordable unit. Okay. I think there were some concerns about who was going to be doing the work. I know there was a couple of quotes that went out. One was substantially higher than what we believe our own maintenance staff is capable of managing. That was part of the factor on how we could decrease the cost. I think that was like almost $10,000. It was in savings by having our staff complete that. They're covered under their own workers' comp, et cetera, so there's no additional fees with their process of completing the work.
The estimate that's part of the, what you gave us, is that just the Housing Authority's own internal estimate?
That's the quote from the maintenance staff on that to complete the project.
Okay.
And you have an automated system that does this?
Yes.
If we understand?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's what we use basically when we have to submit anything to the government for funding, and it's using all of their formulas on what the appropriate fees would be.
Okay. And did you have a chance to look at these numbers, Roger?
Well, to be candid, we just received these today. The estimates are actually dated today, I think. I received a call from Kevin today to go look at the job, so I haven't had an opportunity to really, go through it at all, really.
Did you have any specific concerns I could address while I'm here?
Well, I'm not specific in the sense that I would say there's something wrong with the estimate per se, but I think that it's difficult, having sort of seen this at the, not the sort of, I know you're here in good faith, but to sort of see this stuff at the, literally the 11th hour and the 59th second, and, I'm sorry, minute, and so I can't really weigh in on as to, with any detail as to what the work entails, what it might need. The estimate's pretty detailed in terms of telling us what that is, but I haven't had an opportunity, so it's tough to really say.
I have one question, Bob. I didn't understand, I understand a contingency fee, but in this case, I don't understand an administrative fee, where the administrator should be the housing authority, which is already being paid to administer what they administer. So I don't understand why they get paid, sort of like you get paid twice, and not to be,
It's a challenge. It's actually one of the line items whenever we submit any kind of work outside of what the government defines as the usual customary role. So whenever we engage in larger projects, that we have to line item administrative costs into that to encompass any additional administrative factors that may be encountered. And it's literally a standard item for us.
And all the labor's gonna be performed by Housing Authority staff?
Yes, we have one full-time and two part-time, so the part-timers are always willing to pick up additional hours.
So these hours are additional hours?
They would be outside what they're normally paid.
Okay.
So who's getting, because there's
I
different
believe-
prices, there's like $61 an hour at the bottom here, but then is that what the housing authority people get? At the bottom of here, there's,
It's prevailing wages. We don't set any of those. We can't negotiate those. Those are set by the state.
So why does it,
labor here is 27.43, 22.
why does it say 2743 then?
I'll be honest and tell you, I have not even seen the document.
I mean, the labor charges don't seem to be at prevailing wages. They shouldn't be. Okay.
So if it states prevailing prevailing wage at the bottom, but you're not, if it's your staff, you're not required to pay your staff prevailing wage as employees. If you're hiring an outside contractor, you would be. So maybe that's just some standard language that you've included in the estimate, potentially.
Well, it doesn't look like the way the estimate is actually based on prevailing wage.
No, it does not look that way.
So that must be what they actually are paid now,
I mean,
the staff.
maybe that item was just included to indicate the savings if it was done by staff as opposed to.
All right, so what's being included down here is the DLI wage rates set by the state for workforce. So you've got the carpenter prevailing wage rate that's currently 61.26, and then that will go to 62.03 as of 3/1, and then the lower apprentice rate. So the assistant, basically, to the carpenter will get paid at 29.05.
Yeah, but your staff will. If they work for you guys, that's not the rate you're paying them. That's
No,
if you
this
hire
is
an outside
if we
contractor.
hired an outside
Yeah.
person to do this.
I know in some of our earlier discussions, we raised questions concerning whether this was the best investment of money in this property as opposed to looking at alternatives, for example, to make it maybe 2 or 3 affordable units. Has the Housing Authority looked at that at all?
We have looked into that as part of our long-term strategic plan. We have not come to the conclusion that that's the best avenue to take at this point in time, and that what we're looking to do is to take care of the property that's there and the family that's living there. So we're not looking to expand or enhance anything beyond what really needs to be done to make it an appropriate place to live.
I gather the roof is pretty decent. It's the siding and the windows that we're worried about in
Correct.
terms of wind-driven rain getting in and doing damage.
Correct. And originally, when we first looked at this project, we were encouraged to kind of dig a little deeper to really evaluate everything that could potentially be done. And at this point, we're just looking at, okay, now what really makes sense to keep it an appropriately state house? So that
I think we responded before in terms of the
we were encouraged to look at all the potential things that could be done to make it, top shelf, perfect condition. And I don't know anyone's house. My house is not perfect condition. So looking at what's reasonable and what really needs to be done right now, this is what we're proposing.
I think what we were, when we visited the site, what we were looking at, we weren't trying to have it a top shelf house, but what we were looking at is sustainability. We wanted to look at a 20-year plan in terms of what the capital needs would be on the house for the 20 years in order to keep it in the condition it needs to be, kept in. And the house right now has seen a lot of deferred maintenance, so it needs to be recapitalized to get it back to a certain point. And I think that we were just trying to get a sense of what those items would be over a 20-year plan and what the amortization might be. In other words, you'd do the boiler. I see you've picked the big items that we saw in the second year. All of this is good, I think, what you've done. And you've gone up to the 5th year, but we were also trying to think, the septic system is out there, that needs to be looked at some point. Those what would be the plan as a management plan with this building being a rental property for 20 years, and how does one keep up with the wear and tear and the deferred, and the maintenance? But I'm thinking that, I had a couple of other questions here on the scope and on the estimate. When we initially talked, when we visited the site, there was talk about vinyl siding the house and doing vinyl windows. And what I'm seeing in this is that when we were on the site, there was an interest that the architectural integrity of the house, as a simple shingled cape with white corner boards and wood windows, was maintained. And I was concerned that if we change it to vinyl windows and things like that the house isn't going to be in the same character as the houses around it. And I know there's an issue of trying to do the most with the money you have and do something that's valid. I'm just thinking more in terms of long-term sustainability. $380 vinyl windows are not going to last more than 15 years.
Well, I think there's a question of whether we should even have one rental house. This goes back to the $160,000 investment over 5 years on a house that doesn't look like it's worth a $160,000 investment. So, I mean, to make it look top shelf, I mean, I think the question is whether, I mean, to my mind, why do we have a single one house, and should we get out of the rental property business for one house? And, you know, again, putting what's that?
Town doesn't own it.
Who does own it? Well, I mean, the whole thing is kind of a mess. I mean, so we don't own it, but we have to spend $160,000 to maintain it. I mean, really, for being fiduciarily responsible, this really kind of raises an eyebrow. So, I mean, really, I mean, how do you defend spending $160,000 on one house, one rental property that we don't even own? I wish somebody would, you know, I mean, like, how does that work, you know, I mean, it's.
Going back, Kathleen, is your question on the original purchase of $160 to buy the house, or is it on the money that would be spent in total to maintain the house? I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah, well, to make, because we said this is short on year 5, but just year 4 comes up to almost $110,000.
Right.
And we don't have year 5, and we already had seen that at one point, and I think that bumped it to the 160.
I think this is then when we got into the larger discussion of what's the plan? And you said you hadn't, you know, the housing authority's deliberating and discussing that. You know, I think it seemed appealing to us that if we're gonna invest CPC dollars, why not create more units here? And so this, the 35,000 roughly is to keep this a safe, house with integrity, so that, like, water isn't pouring in. So then we have to decide, well, do you spend 35,000 to, I mean, it's gonna take a while to come up with a plan to build 2 or 4 units there. So is 35,000, yeah, if you can, so is a $35,000 investment,
Wetlands and other
yeah.
issues that need to be need to be looked into some depth.
Initially, when the town purchased this house, it was about $220,000 or something. And if my memory serves me correctly, and the whole goal was to provide an affordable housing opportunity in a detached kind of a setting where the current Scotland Street setting. And so if you look at it as a $220,000 house that and it's been used as a rental property for about 9 years or so, 9 or 10 years, and you look at the condition of the house when it was originally purchased. When the house was originally purchased, it was a really good price, because the house needed work, because the house is about 60, 70 years old now. And when the former owner had it, she did a good job keeping it up, but it was clearly outdated, and it needed some significant work when the town bought it. So here we are 10 years later, essentially capitalizing that. So if the town spends $160,000 to, you know, basically recapitalize the deferred maintenance on this house, you know, you've got a $380,000 investment. Well, for a single-family house in that kind of a setting, as long as you can amortize it, that's not a bad investment when you consider that there really isn't a lot in this town that can be found for $350,000. So I think if you look at it that way, I don't think it's exorbitant. On the other hand, if you were to turn around and want to develop 3 units on this property, and I don't think you could, because it's existing non-conforming with the septic and the wetlands and everything, but even if you could, the capitalization of that probably would be, you know, $800,000 or $900,000 to do all that. And so even if one were to look at keeping this house intact versus redeveloping it, I don't know where the capital would come from to redevelop this entity. I think you still have to maintain this entity, I guess is where I'm going.
Bob, can I just ask the people who are watching at home if somebody could explain? We've just said that the Hingham Housing Authority owns the property.
Yeah.
So if we could explain why CPC is being asked to fund the renovations, so that that's understandable.
One of the classic legs of the CPA tripod is community housing. And where community housing is acquired with CPA funds, as was the case with this property, it becomes eligible on our chart for rehabilitation or restoration if it is acquired or created with CPA funds, and preservation as well. So It is one of the things that the legislature, through the Community Preservation Act, and this town, through its adoption of the act, has committed itself to do as part of the community preservation program.
Different from Thaxter Park, which wasn't purchased with CPC funds, which is why we couldn't do all those, the list of proposals that came before us.
And is there a percentage that the Hingham Housing Authority needs to, and, I mean, obviously, they've made an investment in this property as well, correct? So is there a percentage that somehow, is there a breakdown
No,
as to how much they,
no,
all right, so
no.
nothing in particular?
And of course, the Hingham Housing Authority is really dependent on essentially HUD for all of their funds. So it's,
I mean, that's something I should know, and I don't know. I'm assuming that our
what makes you think,
34,000
any, go
is
ahead.
a cautious price, because we're using Kevin and his two guys to do a lot of the work, and we aren't really paying prevailing wage, quote, prevailing wages. That was to set a standard, what it would be if it was bid out, right? So we should have actually some money to return.
I believe from Hammerhand, which came back about $10,000 more.
So some should be coming back.
And you feel your guys are fully qualified to do the work?
Most definitely.
Well, they've done a great job already on a lot of updating of stuff.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Members of the public? Any other questions or things you'd like to say to us, or Jim as the project manager?
I just feel that, I agree with what Gary said, we made one investment some time ago, we the town, and just out of self-respect and out of, what's the right word, just proper way of doing things is to maintain what you have, and you might argue later on that the kitchen cabinets, a lot of things are aesthetic and nicer, but the walls that leak aren't debatable. And
I
I'm
think
just
it's
very pleased
important.
that the roof is so good that we don't have to get into roofing, we're simply doing the walls and windows right now. And that's preserving it, and the other things are for future discussion.
And I think it's also important to understand that there aren't a lot of affordable family units in Hingham. And this is one of the ones that we're fortunate to have, and it came into ownership.
Ours are almost all elderly and handicapped, we only have a
Right.
handful of them.
The hope was, when this was bought, that there would be many others followed, sprinkled throughout the town as rental units.
So that they weren't just, this is the
Right.
section.
Right.
So that it would,
Right.
And that, in
it would be
fact, they would be
become just a
rental.
part, yes.
As you know, we voted last year to put all the people on low income in one place, so we've already accomplished that last year with the selectmen's parcel, so.
I think you had a
Wait,
word for that.
no,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
voted on one project. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy New Year. Last item is the CPC Administrative Fund. I may be able to get us out of here by 9:30. Just for the benefit of everybody at home, the CPC Administrative Fund funds the salaries of such extraordinary aides to our processes as Roger and Carol. Funds estimates, attorney's fees, administrative costs for our various projects. We've cut down our own request from 50,000, I think initially, to 40,000, after carefully looking at our needs. And unless there are questions or comments from the committee or members of the public, I don't think there's anything else on our agenda tonight, unless there is any new business or anything somebody wants to propose. Not hearing anything, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
See you tomorrow night for more.